And today, my guest is Phill Moreland, who's currently the Senior Sports Science Manager, Human Performance Safety Decorator at the Royal Australian Air Force. Our key topic today will be the similarities and differences of performance sports and military. Thank you for jumping on, Phill. Really looking forward to having a chat, mate.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Eventually we got there after a few attempts at trying, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a bit of persistence, but yeah, really looking forward to it and happy the fact that we did get there in the end. And yeah, really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us with your time. For those that aren't aware of your work, mate, do you mind providing a background of
Yeah,
your work experience so far?
yeah, sure. Look, I've probably been plodding my way in this industry now for about 30 years. Obviously, strength and conditioning has been the bread and butter. Started out in the performance sports space, made the transition to defence about 2 years ago now, which has been
Yep.
an interesting deviation. If somebody had told me years ago, would you be working in the tactical occupational space, I would have probably said no. Sports where I want to be, but it's been a really refreshing change. Prior to stepping in here, I was head of S&C at the New South Wales Institute of Sport. Prior to that, I spent 6 odd years as head of S&C at the Scottish Institute of Sport. Did some time at ACTAS and spent a large chunk of time in Northern Ireland as the head of S&C for the Northern Irish Institute of Sport. So, I've worked from a lot of sports, from everything from, believe it or not, chess through to Olympic sports like beach volleyball, hockey, etc. So yeah, it's been a bit of an interesting journey over the time that's finally landed me here, mate.
Yeah, yeah, and no doubt. I mean, there would be a few coaches listening in that, like myself, would be interesting to discuss them. I'm sure we were a little bit later about that transition. Like you said, it would have been a surprise to you even 3 years ago to make that shift. So even the very fact that it's an opportunity for Australian conditioning coaches to go down the military end is a good one and an interesting one. But to go back more from I guess to start with the sporting side of things, who are some strong influences and mentors, if you like, early on in your career that helped shape your philosophy
Oh yeah,
and
look,
methods?
it's been wide and varying, and I probably haven't just drawn from the S&C world or from the performance sport world. There have been, some, one of my big mentors or a big person that really set stuff up for me or took me probably into the leadership management space was my former director at the Northern Irish Institute of Sport, a guy by the name of Ronnie Smith. I landed in Northern Ireland in 2001. Um, you know, Probably been just an S&C coach for all of my time, and Ronnie was the guy who kind of led that transition from a coach into the leadership role and taking on that head of department stuff, and kind of took me on a bit of a journey in that leadership space and that leadership development space. Kelvin, you've had Kelvin on this podcast. Kelvin Giles has been a big influence across my career and across my time, and I guess Kelvin tends to pop up at critical points of time in my career. He popped up in the very early days of my career when I was trying to find my way and kind of set me on a course. He popped up again as I was looking to transition from the UK back to Australia, or to find a different pathway that I was kind of taking. And he cropped up again, when I started to make this decision about transitioning from sport into this space, and whether the timing was right and whether I was ready to write. So he's been a big influence. Another guy very, very early on in my career, and probably only a few people will know, is a guy by the name of Harry Waddell, who was the inaugural head of S&C at the Australian Institute of Sport. Harry was a Brit, weightlifting background. Very early days in my undergraduate degree, I got to spend a lot of time with him around the AIS back in the early 90s, and he was another person who just kind of confirmed that this was the path that I wanted to travel and join. And then, there are guys that have been actually members of staff of mine that have also influenced my thinking. There's a guy in Scotland by the name of Scotty Crawford, who's he's a fantastic practitioner. He made the transition from rugby player to rugby coach, to then eventually strength and conditioning coach. And he was a person I've known for a long time, but then to when I took on the role of head of department up there, he was a coach within that department and a person that I worked really closely with, and a person who he's got a slightly different, probably a really holistic view of S&C and wellness, and that holistic approach to developing the human and developing the athlete. So yeah, quite a some of the usual suspects, but then some different people that sit in there as well, mate.
Yeah, yeah, good spread of different people with different skill sets as well. The leadership side of things, you mentioned how Ronnie Smith sort of really helped you sort of on that journey. As an S&C that's still very much sort of in the gym, on the field, working with the athletes directly, what is the big shift, or what are some of the big shifts when you start more thinking of the management side of things, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest thing that Ronnie started to really get me thinking about, and I guess the UK system really got me thinking about, was how to think strategically about what we do. I think, as I said, those late 90s, mid 90s, it was very transactional. It was write programs, deliver programs, coach programs. We traveled down that usual needs analysis pathway, understand the sport, da 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 da. All of that stuff that we kind of get taught. But I guess the UK system, and particularly in the run into London, and Ronnie's involvement, probably really started me to think not only strategically about how I manage a program or develop a program, but strategically about how you deal with the sport. So how do you strategically think about where this sport's going? How do you strategically start to plan and think about the outcomes that you're looking for, so that you're not just in that transactional space of write a program, deliver a program, coach a program. You're actually looking at those longer term end goals. How do you actually set up success? How do you set up that longer term success piece? And I think, my exposure, or the time that I spent in the UK, that was probably the biggest thing that that I came back to Australia really with a very different mindset about. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. I think sometimes we try and science things a little bit too much, and I think coming back to a very strategic, simple view of what it is that we're trying to do, I think then allows you to really look at the objectives that you're trying to achieve. It looks at, by being able to set those really strong objectives, and by having that really clear strategic picture, allows it to be a lot easier to integrate the other support personnel that you need, because you're integrating around a common strategic vision and a common set of objectives. So I think that was the big piece. I think obviously the other big piece that where Ronnie influenced me a lot was just how to manage people. What are the structures and the processes that I need to put in place to manage people, to develop people, to grow people? How do I think about that, and how do I plan that into this department development? Because I think that's a critical piece of trying to establish a department, and trying to, particularly in Northern Ireland, when the profession was very new. I think before I arrived, there were probably one or two other S&C coaches on the island of Ireland.
Yeah, wow.
And so you're trying to grow a profession and develop a profession. So how do we think? How do we do that? How do we bring people on? Because it was very easy in the UK system at the time. They were just reaching into Australia and bringing expats across. But I guess we sat down and we very much wanted to develop a system that brought local coaches through the system and developed local coaches through the system. And they're some of the guys that came through that system in Northern Ireland, like Ian McEwen is one of the ones that jumps out. Was a young intern with us, and developed through our system there to where he is now. Another guy by the name of Johnny Davis, who was with Ulster Rugby for a very, very long time as their head of performance, kind of came through that system there. So I think they were, the two critical pieces in that leadership space that Ronnie kind of influenced for me, and I know influenced for a number of us at the time as we embarked on that journey.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're sort of shifting more the focus of micro, being able to coach the athletes, like you said, design the programs, to more thinking how can we influence the future of this environment for years to come. and set up the building blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also by understanding what you're trying to do from that strategic picture, you can make better decisions in your programming space. I think we dive into a needs analysis, and I think one of the things we sometimes forget is the simplicity of how to win in the sport or the activity that we're looking at. So I remember sitting down and having some conversations with people around, the sport of diving, and we were looking at how we develop, what are the things that we need to do to enhance performance in the diving space. And straight away, people dived into that micro, sciencey type level. But when we elevated it back up into big picture to the simple thing, and simplistically, to win a gold medal in diving, you've got to score more points than your opponent.
Mm.
So then you can start asking the questions, well, how do I score more points than my opponent? Well, I've got to increase, I've got to have a significant amount of difficulty in my dive card. Okay, so how can I increase the difficulty in my dive card? Well, I've either got to put in, more twists and turns or more rotations. So then you start to get into a space where you can go, well, how do I increase rotational velocity? How do I increase the capacity in twists and turns? Well, then you start to come down to looking at takeoff velocity, and you can start to really dig
Break it
into
down.
some
Yeah.
of those performance questions, and you're digging into those performance questions from a more higher level understanding, and I would argue in some cases a more simplistic understanding of what you're trying to achieve. I think sometimes we just make it too hard. We try
Mm.
and make it too complex. If we come back to that simple performance outcome, I got to score more points and then ask the questions from there. You kind of land in a space where then all the fancy stuff. Okay, well, where's this diver at? Do they already have good strength to allow for this, or are they strength deficit here? You can then start to really get into those questions and start to get into those performance spaces a lot deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And going back to your career as well, what are some highlights and memories that sort of spring front of mind that you're proud of?
Yeah, look, I guess there's a recollection for me that the role you play in the performances of your athlete is a really small one, and I think we've got to be cognizant of that. Well, at the end of the day, it's down to the athlete, the way they step into the performance environment and what they do and the sacrifices they've made. So, I'm proud to have been associated, with Nat Cook and Kerry in the 2000 beach Olympic gold medal. I'm proud to have been associated with you know, Paul Brazell, and the and his stuff as one of the top Northern Irish sprinters, top UK sprinters. Um, there are a number of athletes that are, I'm proud to have been associated with the Queensland, the inaugural Queensland Sheffield Shield win back in 1994, 95. But to me, I don't really hang my hat on those things. That's not what I got into this about. I didn't get into it to put a medal around my neck or anything along those lines. I got into this to help people and to allow athletes and people to achieve their dreams. And I guess that's the thing that we're ultimately trying to do is we want to get those people to achieve the dream that they've been dreaming about since they were a small kid,
Mm.
effectively.
Yeah, well said. 100%. And on the flip side, obviously, elite sport as well as military comes with pressure, with that responsibility, and yeah, sort of living in it. What have been some sort of growth experiences that you found where you've sort of learnt the most from a professional point of view?
Oh,
Um,
look, I say this quite often because I don't think it happens to a lot of people today. But I just recall the first time I got sacked. you know, the first time, I got dragged into a room and basically told, "Yep, your services are not required anymore." And because I was probably living in a bit of a comfort zone. The couple of programs I was working in had been really successful. The program that I got the sack from, we'd been successful that year. So you're probably in this comfort zone. So that becomes a really huge wake up call. And I kind of remember, I've said this story to a number of people. I kind of remember stepping away from that experience going, I'm never going to let that happen to me again. So what do I need to do? How do I need to continually look to make myself better? How do I need to continually develop myself? How do I need to improve the way I communicate, the way I engage, so that I don't fall into that comfort zone that let me slip to that space where it was very easy for that organization to say, look, you've delivered us great stuff, but I think we need to go in a different direction. So that was a big one. It was pretty confronting at the time, but again, I think I can't. You come away from that. What are the learnings that you take away from that? Is pretty critical. And I think the other ones is allowing yourself to expose yourself to different experiences. I spent a year coaching in Vietnam. I spent 2 years coaching in Brunei, places where English is not a second language. English is not a first language. So how do you hone, or how do you deliver your message then in those types of environments? How do you deliver the best possible program that you can deliver when one of the key coaching tools, verbal communication, is potentially compromised and challenged. So I guess being comfortable to get into those uncomfortable spaces and challenge yourself is really, really important as well. And I guess I learned a lot from my time in Asia. I learned a significant amount of patience in those spaces. I was probably a fairly brash, very driven coach when I went there for the first time, and just expected things would happen tomorrow. And all of a sudden you're in an environment where you might be lucky if it happens in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. So how do you develop that patience? How do you develop that ability? It was the first time I'd kind of been also exposed to actually having to deal with government officials. So how do you communicate in that government space and in that senior hierarchical space to get the outcomes that you're looking for, or to get the things that you need just to simply do your job?
Mm. And is that something that when you're working with and liaising with people in that space, is it something you learn on the go through experience, or do you lean on mentors that have been in similar position before and how to communicate and conduct yourself, or is
Yeah,
it
it's a
more
it's
just an experience thing?
it's a bit of both. I mean, I found I was learning on the go, but you were also reaching out to your mentors, and coming back to that, I think one of the biggest things that when I talk to young coaches and coaches developing, your network of mentors, or your network of people is the strongest thing for you. How do you develop that? How you grow that? Yeah, to reach out in times to, how do I approach this? How do I do this? But a lot of it I found was just learning on the go. You'll try something once and you'll get a rap across the knuckles, and you'll know not to try that again.
Yeah.
Or you'll try something once and you won't get the outcome you want, or you'll try a way that might have been quite forceful and potentially um, not going to get you the outcome you want, and you've deliberately then had a block put in front of you because of the way you've approached it. Then you've got to kind of think about, how do I get around that, and how do I navigate a different direction that might get me to where it is. So there's a lot of learning on the go, but there's also a lot of talking to people as well to understand how to do it. And I think stepping into this defense environment, that's been huge. How do you, because it's a really unique environment in here. So how do you're talking and relying on good contacts and colleagues that are in defense to help you
Mm.
understand how to navigate those meetings and how to navigate those spaces.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty and the openness in your experiences there. Good segue into the key topic, which is the differences of military and elite sport. I guess from an environment point of view, being a leadership position in both worlds, how do you sort of find the difference between being in a leadership sort of managerial position with sport compared to military?
Yeah, look, I'm lucky that the team that I have in the defence space that I have largely, well, primarily come from performance sport. So
Right.
we're very targeted in our approach on who we look at. We've got a great S&C team. We've got a great physio team. We've got a great nutrition team. They're an excellent group of practitioners, and at the end of the day, I quite often say this to my boss. My my role is made easy by the exceptional practitioners that are working day in and day out on the ground, and delivering on the ground. So the approach for me, because of where they've come from, then is very, very simple, and very, very straightforward. It's about clarity of task. It's about clarity of direction. It's about them understanding, the term we use in the defence space is left and right of arc. So, where their boundaries are, what their boundaries are, understanding what our objectives are in the particular programs that we're working to, and then effectively, being blessed with a group of motivated individuals, go chase that. And that's working really, really, really well in the space that we're in. I guess the bit for me is the managing up piece into the senior leadership within defence, where this performance concept is very different. It's not there, and particularly in the RAF space, we've got an exceptional organisation that value technical mastery of their jobs very, very highly. They want to be technically the best that they can be with the job roles that they have, but we're not like Army, where they recognize the need for both. So we've got a lot of work to do to help drive this performance piece this. Not only do you need to be technically proficient at your job, you need to be physically proficient to do your job over and over and over again. And so I think it's the manage up piece and the work up into that space, which is the stuff that's really different, because unlike the performance sport organization, you've probably got a performance director that understands performance and the need for what you're selling. You've got a chief exec of the institute who, understands the need of what we're doing and all of that type of stuff, whereas in my space, I've just been doing some work with one senior leader around a specific workforce where we've had to take them on a bit of a journey to understand performance. Fix my workforce. Well, that's going to take a long time to fix your workforce, because we need to do this. There's a little bit of a thought that, we'll drop in tomorrow, write some physical prep programs, and everything will be fixed, next week. So that's the workspace that we've got to do a lot of work in.
And what about the facilities and technology involved, like compared to a team sporting team or an Olympic athlete, in terms of gym, recovery centres? You mentioned access to staff there, so
Yep.
it sounds like there's a relatively similar
Yep.
access to staff support. But yeah, gym, I guess, any GPS or objective measures, force plates and things like that.
So again, this is all new. So what you've got our programs are very varied and different. So in some places, we would have you would walk into it and it'd look like the typical sport model. So it's an integrated performance team sitting in an environment. There's physio, there's S&C, there's performance psych, there's nutrition. They're integrated around a specific performance group. They run, for all intents and purposes, what looks like a performance sport program with your performance staff meetings, all of those objective measures and markers that are in place or developing, because it's a really interesting performance space to understand, because what does performance in an occupational space look like? What this whole concept of game day for us, kind of, you hope doesn't exist.
Yeah. That was
But
going to be my
game,
next question. What
but but
working
but
back from performance?
game day does exist in other spaces. So if we look at the recent floods and the support that the Defence Force gave in the flood space, that's the type of stuff that we react to. It's the very short notice to do something, or to be
You always
ready
got to
to
be
do
ready.
something. So
Yeah.
trying to get this understanding of perpetual readiness, and I guess where we're looking to that is we had a really interesting presentation from Duncan French the other day out of UFC, and we see a lot of similarities in that space, where you've got a fighter in that combat sports place who's in that perpetual readiness phase, and then all of a sudden, fight day gets announced, and then they go into a specific prep period for that fight. And so we see potentially in a lot of our occupations that's the same for us. We're in this just perpetual readiness space, and how do we grow that? but coming back to the program makeup, in other programs it doesn't look like that at all, and in other programs we don't know what the objective markers should be. We don't know what the measure of performance should look like. We're trying to understand that and learn that. Our performance staff might be an S&C coach who's only part-time there because he's got other responsibilities across other programs or other spaces. So, again, a similar piece. The other thing that we're really looking to approach is this long-term athlete development concept. How do we apply those types of concepts into this defence space, about linking the stages of development as a person's coming through their career, so that they're, we're preparing them from one stage to the next So again, that's a real learning piece for us about how can we apply those principles? What do those principles look like? How do they work within this type of environment? So there's a lot of learning that's really going on, and a lot of looking overseas. I mean, we're very young in this HPO space here. I think the US are a lot further down that journey and down that pathway. So really looking to the lessons that they've learned on how they've rolled things out and how they've developed things, and the types of metrics they're starting to capture and connect as well. I mean, you look on LinkedIn today and there's a plethora of stuff coming out in that tactical space from the US, particularly in their H2F Army program, etc., etc.
With the high value of the technical proficiency, is the physical work done and the long-term athlete development done sort of behind the scenes in an individual, where they're doing it in their own time with a set
Yeah.
course, or are they doing it as part of a structured, scheduled work?
And again, it's varied, but predominantly in Air Force, it's the onus is on you to develop it, to do
Right.
that in your own time. So I guess I come back to what I was talking about into that LTAD model space. We want to then, how do we then install that management of self piece then very early on? How do we install that this is actually important and you need to take it on board and drive it and deliver it? So I think and I don't think that's particularly a challenge for the defence space. I see that as a challenge in the performance sport space as well. I'm sure whoever's in this environment understands the generational change that's taken place, and we look at the fundamental skill sets that our early athletes, or whatever they be, are coming through the system with, and the gaps and deficiencies in that space. That self-ownership and that self-drive and that self-responsibility piece to want to make myself better and take ownership of my growth and my development, I think is a challenge in a number of environments in the current social structures.
And from a, I guess, for the strength and conditioning coaches working in this field or looking to work in this field, what would a periodized annual plan look like, or is there not one? Is it more a 6 week sort of blocks and seeing what's in front of you? If
Yeah,
always try to get ready.
no, yeah. Well, we come back to that. It is into that perpetual space. But in saying that, we are able to start to get places starting to think about what annual planning would look like. And we've probably got a couple of distinct phases within a year where you've got the early start of the year, where you're probably getting people coming back from leave and going into a bit of a GPP type setup and structure. You've probably got a latter start of the year where there's potentially activity and training activities happening. So you're in a bit more of a maintenance-y type phase. So we are starting to be able to develop some of those phases, but I guess I come back to the stuff we were talking about with Duncan, and just this perpetual GPP. And then you might get a unit that goes, oh well, we're going to go and do this activity in 6 weeks, and then you can go, right, now we're on a 6-week preparation phase.
Yeah.
And then I think this is a space where we need to get better at of how we plan in that space, but equally when we do have activities, how we actually plan recovery post activities as well. So I think there's still work to do and understanding how best to periodize and plan in the spaces. But the more we're involved, or the more we spend time in the environment, the more we can start to see ways. And I guess I come back to what I was talking about at the start, the simplicity. Let's not overcomplicate it. Some of our planning is really, really simple. I mean, some of our testing is really, really simple. Are you above the unit average? Are you below the unit average? So I think we've got to find ways that keeps things and our planning and our preparation simple enough and agile enough. Um, we're looking at this concept of agile periodization, and what we mean by that is um, coming into this autonomy space and educating people in the occupational environment to think about, okay, well, I've had a hard day at work today, and I've potentially got a hard day at work tomorrow. What are my training choices going to be? I've worked today and it hasn't been that hard a day, and I'm working tomorrow. What are my choices going to be? I've worked today, but I've got a day off tomorrow. What's my training choices going to be? So we're looking at trying to develop this red, amber, green programming. So our red is that you've had a hard day at work and you're potentially having a hard day at work tomorrow. Then you're in this regen recovery type idea of this is what you should do in the gym this afternoon, or this is what you should do at home, and equally yellow and green. And then trying to develop some program sets and some program uh, generic programs that are then coded red, amber, green that people can tap into, utilize, and use. And I think this is the challenge in any occupational space. It's not it's the challenge in the police space, the fire space. It's the challenge in the office worker space who might be sitting in a chair all day, running a dispatch call or something along those lines. Understanding what I can do and when I can do it, and trying to give them some tools around making those decisions and those choices, I think is really important.
And I guess the rehab side of things for those that get injured, what does that process look like? Do they hire people outside privately, or is there support there in the
Yeah,
defence to
so
get them back to work?
so I mean, defence has the luxury, as a defence member, there's Joint Health Command, health manages a lot of that rehab, health manages a lot of all of that injury, return to work type space. But again, I think it's like any performance space. We need to come back to a good understanding of the occupation that we're working in and we're operating in, to be able to then understand what a proper return to work pattern looks like.
Hmm.
To make it's the same type of thing. You see it in performance sport where we haven't done an adequate reload of that individual before we've returned them to competition. It's the same type of thing. We see examples where we probably haven't done an adequate reload of that individual before they've gone back to the workspace, or they've been cleared for work again. So I think we've still got to look at some work in that space about how we do that differently. And I think part of what we're hoping to do going forward, or want to do, is that integration with health and the joint health space, and how we can work a lot closer together.
And what are sort of the most common injuries? Are there ones that are sort of preventable, or are they more just
Look,
hard to prevent?
it's occupationally relevant, and I'm not a believer that you can prevent injuries. I work in the space that I can do everything that I can to mitigate the risk of injury, but
Mm.
at the end of the day, you know, we operate both in sport and this in potentially high high velocity environments, or high force producing environments. Injuries are going to happen. How do we mitigate that to the best of our ability? And again, they're occupationally specific. I mean, you would know that in the occupational space, lower back, etc., across a lot of workplaces is probably the key one. When we look in some of our flying spaces, necks, When we look in some of our other spaces, shoulders. So it can be quite broad, and I think that comes back to understanding the performance needs and the performance requirements of our occupations. Is really important to be able to understand what those common injury traits are about. You know, one of the big things that's one of our most common injuries that we see in this space is actually, you know, people pursuing their own sport. So some of our programs are geared around, well, how do we help them, you know, mitigate the risk of injury in their sporting environment,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well
yeah.
as the occupational environment.
Yeah, yeah. I heard the other week that there was a real push um, for playing football with your comrades and playing team sport
Yeah,
from a community piece.
yeah. I mean, sport, I think, is a big part of life. Be it, you know, in defence or not in defence, and I think, you know, we should encourage that. And yeah, how do we, you know, we've got guys in some programs we work with that like to run marathons. Okay, so how can we help them not only achieve the occupational goals that they're looking for, but how can we help them achieve their goals in that marathon space or in that running space? So, you know, it's quite broad, the way we look at our programming and planning as well.
Yeah, and in military in general, I guess defense and Royal Air Force, like how often would a career cut short due to a severe injury?
Oh yeah, look, retention is big. You know, ultimately, like we drive a philosophy within HPS, within RAF, which is, you know, fit for life. So ultimately, yes, I'm preparing people to do their job and to do their job better, but ultimately, I'm wanting to make sure that people are preparing themselves to be able to go and enjoy their life after defence, to be able
Mhm.
to enjoy their, you know, their family life, their life with their kids. You know, that's the stuff that's really important as well. Um, so yeah, you know, come back to that injury mitigation piece. We want to alleviate as much risk as we can to injury to prevent those long-term injury pieces happen. And that's an area that we really want to look at and really want to drive towards.
And is that where the government is sort of the funding and the recent sort of value in the physical performance side has come from? Is due to injuries and mitigating those, or is it more the performance side of
Oh,
things, or is
look,
it a bit of both?
I think it's twofold. I think it's, yep, we wanna reduce those injury risks. We want to mitigate those injury risks. We want to enhance performance and enhance capability. But we wanna, you know, retain people. We wanna, you know, we want to keep people. We want to, you know, have them in a physical space where they want to stay as part of the environment for as long as they can. And so that's where, you know, we come back to that fit for life piece. You know, not it's fit for life is what we're driving towards.
Very good. Before we start to wrap up the show, Phil, is there anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to discuss from the
Oh,
difference between or similarities with league
I don't
sport
think
and
so, mate. I think we've covered it really well. You know, I guess the one thing that I'll kind of wrap up with, you know, one of the things that we always get when we kind of step into the environment, when we start to work with people in these occupations is, you know, we get the pushback that says we're not high performance athletes. And I guess the mantra that I try to drive there is, no, you're not high performance athletes, but you're high performers. So I
Mm.
think we've got to recognize in the occupational space that there are high performers in there within the occupations that they've chosen to be a part of. And so it's it's not about just landing a high performance program. It's about taking our principles and our understanding of what works in high performance sport and how does it imply, or how can we apply it to the environment that we're in.
I guess from an industry point of view, you mentioned the surprise, even for yourself in hindsight, making this transition as a strength and conditioning coach and working in high performance, where you've been in the industry for 30 years. For someone that's listening and thinking, oh, that actually would interest me, uh, what would be, you know, is it, how do you get the foot in the door in this world? Is it similar to sport? And, you know, like you mentioned, the importance of network and putting your best foot forward. or
Yep.
is there a different sort of tactic to, like, how did you get your first sort of experience
My
in a job?
network.
And yeah,
Literally my network. It was sent by someone in my network as, would you, something that you might be interested in.
yeah,
It originally was put across to me as a 2 day a week thing around a specific project. With after discussions with my now boss, turned into the full-time role that I'm kind of now in, and
oh,
there's somebody else running that full project. So network is really important. I think reaching out and chatting to people. I think the occupational space is only growing, and I want to shift away from purely the tactical piece, because I think it's broader than just the tactical space. It's, I think the broader occupational support piece is only going to grow and is only going to develop. You look across, you've obviously got the obvious spaces like, the first responder space, military, police, fire, but what about other occupational spaces? What about, the people working in call centers? What about the other occupational spaces where there's, mining? There's significant opportunities starting to develop in mining. There are a number of mining companies that now employ, occupational physiotherapists that are running programs. I was talking to the guys at TACFit container, the guys that do the container gyms probably 18 months ago, and some of their biggest clients were mining companies. So, there's other spaces where the step into the occupational space and to be able to take our skills in understanding human performance can start to apply. We look at a number of universities are starting to recognize this as well. I notice, I think it might have been Harpney University in the UK have set up a human performance optimization masters. So I
oh,
think the space is starting to grow and starting to develop, and if we look at trends, we look at the typical trend of where the US is. The number of S&C coaches employed across their defence space is pretty significant. So that trend, I would hope, and I hope starts to come this way as well.
yeah, yeah, fantastic. It's a good way to look at it. A bit of a crystal ball, see what the
Yeah,
US are doing.
yeah, yeah.
Well, there you go. That's exciting news for, yeah, the whole industry. That there's plenty of opportunities to come, and a lot of growth. And for what you found in, from a skill set point of view, are there certain areas that you'd want to develop that are more useful in the defense sort of space compared to sport, or are there still a lot of crossover
No,
as
the
an
the, the,
SC?
the crossovers, the crossover's the same. I think the biggest thing that I've found with people in that I've brought into this space is probably I focus a lot more on ability to make connections, your ability to interact with people, your ability to communicate, your ability to create relationships, your ability to sustain those relationships, your ability to communicate effectively. I think that probably, they're skill sets that we need in high performance sport, but they probably sit higher on my radar than technical skills.
Hmm.
I think, we're in an environment where, I can probably get away and help someone develop if their technical skills are, not at that elite level, but if their ability to communicate or their ability to build relationships is not even there, and we've got no hope of succeeding whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because I come back to the earlier comments that we're really in a space where we're just trying to, you know, grow that understanding of why this is important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes a lot of sense, and a good way to wrap it up. Moving over to the more the personal side, mate. Do you have pet peeves or anything that fires you up that in your work life?
Um, Probably not ones I could repeat here. No, I don't. Look, I don't really. I think I've learned to, to just roll with the flow. I think I've learned that, you're going to be presented with challenges. You need to work out how to deal with those challenges and overcome those challenges. And I guess I'm probably at a space now, at a time in my life where it's probably not actually worth getting wound up about those things. it's time to, you probably, more value in parking that, moving on and finding a different way to get things forward. I guess if you would say the only peeve is if a person, doesn't achieve the job that we've asked them to achieve, and doesn't get the outcomes that we've asked them to achieve, and is not doing the job that we've asked of them, then yeah, that's probably a big frustration. But that's just part of management and part of dealing with people.
Mm-hmm. What about favourite way to spend your day off?
Believe it or not, watching sport.
Yeah.
That's pretty much, I probably find myself watching a lot more sport than even when I was working in sport. I suppose it's that
back into a hobby now.
It becomes the hobby again. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
watching sport, I guess, obviously trying to spend time with the fam, and I guess that was probably one of the big things that led to this change and transition across. Is, I guess, I found that I got large elements of time back, and probably elements of my life back, because I'm not necessarily in that 24/7 sport mode anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in it's a very different environment, and it's not the same in terms of that 24/7 expectation piece. So, which has been a hard habit to break, because you're obviously in that hard habit, and you're conditioned to it. And you sit on a Saturday and you're working away, and the first thing Monday morning, there's a nice email from your boss, kind of asking you very politely why you were sending him emails over the weekend, and not spending time doing what you need to enjoy. I found that that was a very interesting thing that happened, which that would never happen in sport. Your boss reaching out and going, "What are you sending me emails for over the weekend?" So literally stop. So yeah, it's a bit different in that space.
Yeah, that's great. And we're recording this in early May of 2023. What are you excited about for the rest of the year? What's on the horizon for you?
Oh, look, we've got some exciting extensions of our programs. We're starting to start to fill in that middle section of the long-term athlete development framework piece. We've got really good work happening at our entry points. Now we're looking at that midpoint where people, learn their trade and ply their trade. So we've got some exciting program developments happening in that space. Yeah, just the continued expansion of what we do and where we do. I think on the horizon, as I spoke to you about before, how do we start to get those better interactions with some of the other organisations within the space, to work closely with them. I obviously sit on the TOPPER, the Tactical Operational Performance Association of the committee of the ASCA. We've got a new course that we're writing and developing at the moment, which will come to fruition later on in the year. I'm pretty excited about that and that development, and the direction that the committee is potentially going to go with some of the growth in that space. Yeah, and I got my youngest is going to graduate from high school at the end of the year, so that's a big milestone to look forward, and where does he go in his career and stuff like that. And yeah, so there's a few different things I'm excited about for the rest of the year, mate.
Yeah, plenty happening. That's fantastic. For that that course, with the tactical side for ASCA, is that going to be like a level system? Is it more like a specific one course, or is it
yeah, look, we're still in development at the moment on how we look at it and what we do. We're looking potentially at a number of different thought processes around it. So I guess it'll be just watch this space when we launch it later on down the track. Yeah.
Very good, very good. And for anyone that has any follow-up questions, might be related to that, or anything that's been mentioned, is there a place to get in contact or to connect with you on socials? Or
yeah, look, you'll only find me on LinkedIn. You won't find me on any of the other socials. That's just not the space. On LinkedIn, I'm happy for people to reach out to me on LinkedIn if they want to connect in that space. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, for those driving, listen to the podcast, we can add the link in the show notes so you can connect with Phill on LinkedIn. And thank you for everyone that's tuned in. Thanks again, Phill, for jumping on and sharing us with your time and your experience in both elite sport and military. It's the first that we've had on with this podcast. So fascinating chat, and I've taken a lot from it, and no doubt the listeners have as well, both high-performing athletes as well as staff. Thank you again, mate. And if with a connection piece, if from a LinkedIn point of view, if anyone has any follow-up questions on other socials, they want to send them to me, I'm more than happy to pass them on to Phill as well. And for the podcast, we'll release this next Wednesday. So make sure if you're listening to this halfway through live, you can watch it on YouTube or just listen to your favorite podcasting app next week. I'll see you guys on the next show.
Cheers.